Dedico mi participación en
I am at this forum, and this is because of indigenous women, and I represent those women. We are struggling for our future. Before I actually came to Geneva, 6 indigenous women were crying for justicia in La Paz. They had been hit. They had, before more than 200 miners, they had been pushed off their lands by mining companies. This is the Totoral Chico people, and they had suffered because of the mining interests. I'm very happy to be here so I can share with you what is happening in my country. Unfortunately, the international community has for a long time turned its gaze from Bolivia. Today, we are paying the price for that. There is a judicialization, there is a criminalization of dissent, and there's abuse of power. But even more serious is that indigenous peoples have been condemned to extermination. My name is Toribia Lero Quispe. I am a defender of human rights and of community rights, and I have been doing that for more than 30 years. My father was a miner. From the age of 17. He worked for 35 years. He got sick, he died, but he was left completely alone to die alone. My mother, with 11 children, had to go back to our community at Abralaqueja, and we then worked there, and we grew our own food. It is there that I learned the values of my people, the importance that we attach to water, the land, biodiversity, flora and fauna, and also to our culture. And I also understood that we do not want to lose this heritage that we have from our forefathers, the land and the areas we live in. And we were always exposed to the mining companies when they came into the area. We have the largest indigenous population of Latin America. More than 64% of the population we see ourselves as indigenous. And there are 54 peoples, and we speak 40 languages. And for us, our ethnicity is key to our identity. And therefore, the fight for the indigenous peoples is something which has changed the direction of our countries. In 1990, in the Amazon region, there was a major march. We went more than 600 kilometers to get to the seat of government, and we called on the state to recognize us. Because up until then in the country, no one had really recognized the existence of these peoples in the Amazon region. And this was the beginning that when we started calling upon the government to make structural changes. And for that reason, we suggested that we have a constituent assembly, and for the first time, we wanted to write a new constitution for the country or a new social compact. And in 2005, Hugo Morales was elected as president. He was the indigenous president, and in fact, he was recognized as such. And in 2009, a new constitution was passed. It was a plurinational constitution, and this recognized the various ethnicities, groups, languages, and so on, systems of justice, systems of education, and it also recognized the different ways in which these peoples did politics. And we believed that our lives would change, but they didn't. In fact, we became the first victims of what was called this indigenous government. The fact that we'd actually asked the government to do something, we asked them to have a prior informed consent, and we were, as a reaction to that, there was terrible repression because they wanted to build a road through an indigenous area, for example. And in that area, one has got more than 208 mammals, and there are reptiles. There are 157 types of amphibians, and this is the third most biodiverse park in the world. The indigenous peoples, we mobilized so as to defend this area, and we walked 300 plus kilometers. But here the government ordered that they stop our procession, that they stop us marching. They prohibited access to water, to food, and even to shelter. And there were hundreds of women and children. And they actually denounced this through the media, through alternative media, because the mainstream media wouldn't touch the story. And for these reasons, there was a major mobilization so as to make clear this terrible atrocity that was happening against the indigenous peoples because of this protest. In September, it was a Sunday, and I had a call that we are being attacked said this sister. She said, they're firing, and then we lost contact. And then a day later we were told that my indigenous brothers and sisters have been attacked by the police and the Air Force. And they were basically, their arms and their feet were tied, and then their mouth, they were gagged using tape, sticky tape, and they couldn't even shout. And they were then taken to buses, they were taken to airports, and basically they were hijacked, really, and their children were simply left in the woods, and luckily a farmer found these children. They were very, very young. Now, the people who are the actual perpetrators, both physical and the intellectual ones, now they are working as UN ambassadors now. Some of them are ambassadors in other countries here in Europe, and 13 years have now passed, and we've had no justice. And a lot of my brothers and sisters and human rights defenders have received death threats, and we have been told we're not allowed to talk about indigenous rights. This is a government which destroyed our organizations, and they basically took away money that we had, which was in the Indigenous Fund, and they're now using this so that they can use it for political ends. So this is really depressing. My husband, my children cried with me, as did others. These abuses have continued, because Morales then brought in a number of laws so as to burn forests without any follow-up, so that when people were mining, and they could put mercury into the rivers so that they could get gold. And now many people, hundreds of people, have not got cyanide and mercury, lead and arsenic poisoning because of these methods that were used. And in fact, this has been proven by a UN institute. So what is happening in our country is terrible, and people are running away from their communities now. They are trying to get to justice, but they find no justice. There are 18 nations and ethnic groups which are now very vulnerable and which could well be made extinct. And recently, an indigenous woman went to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and there are 32 women who were actually pregnant during what happened. They lost their babies, they miscarried, but absolutely no investigation is being carried out. And in 2009, in 2019, Hugo Morales fled my country. But the country was on the edge of a civil war, and then we have got a new president now after elections, and they're following with the same policies, and they're still imprisoning opposition leaders, and many are now in prison. Before I left, the judicial elections were cancelled by the governments. So how can we be certain that we have democracy? How can we guarantee it? All the democratic institutions are completely controlled. And what they want, these people who abuse power, they want my country to become another Nicaragua, another Cuba. So I would ask that we denounce this, and I would ask all the institutions, the international community, do not forget Bolivia. Look at Bolivia. Now, it has been somewhat forgotten, but looking at the atrocities in my countries, it happened with Evo Morales was in power, And the first, when he came in, people applauded him. They thought he was the best president in the world. He wasn't. And I would therefore ask you that let's defend democracy, defend liberty and justice. Thank you.